So welcome properly to this webinar on My Health Record, Risks and Tips for Transgender and Gender Diverse Individuals. We are broadcasting this webinar today from Legal Aid New South Wales Central Sydney office, and before we start we would like to acknowledge and pay our respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional owners and custodians of the land we are broadcasting from today. In the webinar we are discussing a really important and timely issue of My Health Record in Australia. And particularly today, we'll be talking about some of the risks and some tips to manage those risks. The information today is general legal information and not legal advice, but we will tell you where you can go for legal advice. My name is Natalie. I'm from the Community Legal Education branch here at Legal Aid New South Wales, and we run a Law for Community Workers program with webinars and also podcasts on lots of different areas of law. And we are very fortunate to have here today three experts. We've got Chris and Emily from Dentons and Vicky from the Inner City Legal Centre here in Sydney. So Emily, Chris and Vicky, would you like to introduce yourselves, a bit about your work and your interest in this topic?
Hi, I'm Vicky from Inner City Legal Centre. Inner City Legal Centre offers free legal advice and casework for people who are living in Sydney who can't afford a lawyer, but we also run the Trans and Gender Diverse Legal Service in partnership with Dentons. So to book an appointment with the Trans and Gender Diverse Legal Service, give us a call. Should I phone number now?
You can give the phone number now and we'll also have that at the end.
Okay.
In the notes.
So it's 029 332 1966, and that service runs on Mondays, every second Monday, and we can do advice by telephone if we need to too.
And that's for anyone in New South Wales?
Look, it is for anyone in New South Wales, but you know, sometimes we can talk to people in other states depending on what their particular problem is.
Great, thanks, Vicky. Emily?
Yes, my name's Emily. I'm from Dentons. We're a commercial law firm in Sydney, and like Vicky said, we're the partner with the ICLC for the Trans and Gender Diverse Legal Service, and so we're doing some kind of work in this space under the careful guidance of the ICLC with all their knowledge. And I have today with me my colleague Chris.
Hello. Yes, I'm also a commercial lawyer with Emily at Dentons in Sydney, and I've been fortunate enough to be a volunteer solicitor with the ICLC as part of the Trans and Gender Diverse Legal Service, as it's been starting up in the last few months or so.
So we might kick off then. So we'll just start with kind of a broad overview of what we're going to take you through today.
Yep, and sorry to interrupt, Emily. We might have one practice poll first, just to get an idea of what people's understandings are or currently about the My Health Record. So you can see on your screen there, you've got a question. What's your current understanding about My Health Record? Is it all new to you, or you have some knowledge, or you'd like to know more? So I'll just give you a second to answer that. We'll close the poll now and we can share the results of polls. So there'll be a few of these during the webinar. So Emily, we've got 80% of people say they've heard of My Health Record, but they'd like to know more, and 20% are aware of the issues, but it's not new to anyone. So most people have heard but want to know more. So that's great.
Fantastic. Well, we're certainly going to give you some more information about it today to better prepare you for when this system kicks off next year. So here's what we're going to talk you through today. We're going to kind of give you a brief overview of what the advantages and risks are of a My Health Record. It's not all negative, there are some positives, so you'll have to consider and weigh them up for you personally. Once we've done that, we'll talk about how you can implement risk management strategies depending on what your key concerns are about the My Health Record system. And we'll kind of give you the information you need to enable you to decide whether you need to opt out or not. So that's what we're going to go through today. So I guess to start with, we'll just give you a kind of brief overview of what is it and who cares about it really. So the My Health Record is a digitally accessible summary of your key health information. The information on your My Health Record comes from three sources. So that's firstly, your doctors, so your treating practitioners can upload information on your behalf. Some information will also come from Medicare. So the information from Medicare is things like the pharmaceutical benefit scheme information. So that's the medicine that you're prescribed and receiving. And you can also upload your own information. So you can log in there and put up little descriptions of your medical history and what's been happening to you yourself. So the system was established in 2012, so it's not exactly new. But when it was established in 2012, it was an opt-in system. So no one automatically received one. Mostly people tended to receive one as parts of trials that were carried out. So you may already have a My Health record depending on where you live. If you don't already have one, however, you will automatically receive one on 31 January 2019 unless you opt out prior. So once that date has passed, everyone in Australia will have one. So what happens at the opt-out date? When you first get a record, it pulls your Medicare information from the past 2 years. You can choose not to add your information, or you can delete that information after your record has been created. But that's what will automatically be on there. No other information is automatically recorded. So nothing else that's happened to you previously, your GP visits, any surgeries you've had, any x-rays, blood tests, none of that will be recorded if it's historical. But from the date that you have a record, all of your future information is automatically recorded. Now, there is some discussion of potentially being able to exclude certain information and letting your GP know you don't want that information recorded, and Chris will talk you through that later. But unless you kind of take proactive steps to prevent information being recorded, it will automatically go to your record. So why might you choose to have a My Health record in the first place then? The first reason is that it makes it easier to keep track of your medical history. That could be good for you if you move around a lot and you don't have a regular practitioner. It can also be good for you if you have a chronic health condition. So if you find yourself going to different practitioners and having to retell your entire medical history every time, and the details of when you had this surgery and when you had that surgery and what medications you're on and how often you have to take them, that can be exhausting. And for people with chronic conditions, this might make it a little bit easier to manage.
So Emily, we've had a really interesting question about if people use different names or don't use their real name with their medical practitioners.
Yeah, so that's a good question. Your My Health record is linked up to your identity document. So to have a My Health record, it links to whatever's on your Medicare card or your passport or your birth certificate, your identity documents. So that can be a problem. That's something that we might talk about a little bit later in the presentation. But it is something to be aware of. It can make it difficult to either opt out of the system, which we'll talk about a bit later, and it can make it difficult for doctors to access. But we might talk about that a little bit later, if that's all right.
Great, thanks.
So another reason you might have a My Health record is that it can be good for emergency situations. So if something happens to you and you need emergency medical treatment, the people treating you will be able to immediately see if you've got any kind of life-threatening allergies or things like that. And finally, it can be good for your doctors to have a broad overview of your medical history. That might assist them in kind of diagnosing things and detecting patterns in your symptoms and things like that. But there are some concerns at the same time. It's not all positive. And the two biggest concerns are privacy and cybersecurity. So when we talk about privacy, we're talking about being concerned about who can access the data and how can they use it. So we'll go through that firstly. Now, the real concern from a privacy perspective for trans and gender diverse individuals is that there might be situations where you don't want people knowing about your gender history. You might see a variety of medical practitioners, and some of those you might trust to know that gender history information, but there might be others that you don't trust or don't want them to have that. And it can be a personal safety risk as well, depending on where you live and the kind of environment you're in. That can be a real risk for some people. There also are privacy concerns around not only medical practitioners accessing your information, but family members accessing your information. So we'll go through that in a second, but you can allow family members to access your record. That can be a risk if you have partners or family members who don't know about your gender history, or if you end up in a family violence scenario and they have access to that record. That can also be a big personal safety risk.
Emily, before you talk about who can access the records, we might do another quick poll to see what people's understanding is at the moment. So I was talking to a friend yesterday who has opted out, and she was concerned that police could have access, for example. So I think there are a lot of maybe misunderstandings in the community, but let's see what people think. So we've got a question up there. Who of the following can access your records? Insurance companies, employers, you, your doctor, your nominated or authorised representative. Oh, everyone's totally on top of this. So 100% of people say you, your doctor, and your nominated or your authorised representative.
And the good news is you are all 100% correct. That is exactly who can access your information. So we'll talk a little bit about that now. We'll start with who can access your information. As you all identified, you can access it. So you can view your record, amend it, delete it, change it, all of that stuff. Your medical practitioner can also view it and amend your record. The one thing to note in regards to your medical practitioner accessing your record is that it's not restricted to an individual doctor. It's organisation specific. So for example, the GP clinic that you go to will have a My Health Record account for that GP clinic. Now that means people like secretaries at the clinic can also see your record, and doctors at the GP clinic other than your doctor could theoretically see it. Now, as we'll discuss, they shouldn't be looking at it unless they're treating you. That's the condition of access for your record, is that they have to be actively engaged in your treatment in order to look at it. And it can also be accessed by your nominated or authorised representative. Now, that's really like a bunch of garbage legal words. What does that mean? Your nominated representative is anyone that you choose to give access to. So you can say, I would like my partner to be able to look at my record. Your authorised representative is someone who automatically has access to your record because they are, for example, your legal guardian. So if you're a child, then your parent can access your record. Or if you have a legal guardian appointed due to kind of a lack of capacity or something like that, your representative, your guardian, will be able to access it. But who can't access your records? There have been a lot of concerns in the news and people talking about insurance companies or your employers or even the police accessing your record. And the good news is that they can't access your record. For anyone other than you or your doctor or your representatives to access your record, they need a court order. Now, you'll see on the slides there, it says that that's currently a policy. The good news is that I can tell you that the law has changed as of Monday this week, and now that is mandatory. So they will definitely need a court order. They can't get around that anymore. Now, what that means is that essentially the My Health Record system, in this respect at least, is no different to the current state of affairs with regards to your medical records. That is to say, anyone right now could go to the court and say, hey, I would like a copy of John Doe's medical record from such and such clinic, and they might be able to get that. So this is really no different in that respect now. So what we might talk about then is I guess how they might use your record, which is the other main concern. Now, as I mentioned, the use of your My Health Record is for the purposes of your treatment. So the doctors can't look at your record or use your record unless it is related to giving you medical care. They can use it without your consent if it's a case of a serious threat to life, health, or safety. So that would really be an emergency healthcare situation. You know, if you're in a car crash, if you're unconscious, if you can't give consent, they can access it regardless.
And Emily, just about access to a nominated person, can you withdraw that?
Yes, you definitely can. So once you've nominated a representative, if you change your mind, you can definitely withdraw their access to your record. And that's something good to remember as well. If you're in a relationship and they have access and then that relationship breaks down, probably a good idea to immediately withdraw that access. So if you do decide to give someone access, keep it in your mind. You will need to take steps to withdraw it it could be a risk in some cases. But other than these two uses, your information can't be sold, and it can't be kind of sold to insurance companies, which is something that people are very nervous about. The only other use is what's called a secondary use, and this is a use for medical research. So it's not currently, the data currently isn't being used, but it's expected that in 2020 they're going to start using it for medical research. Now, typically your data will be made anonymous, so it won't be linked to you, but there may be circumstances in which you can give consent to give non-anonymous medical data for research. You can choose not to engage in this medical research use at all, so you can opt out of that medical research even if you do have a My Health record. And the laws that came into effect this Monday have also specified that the medical research will never be by private health insurers. So private health insurers, even if they're trying to sell it as a medical research stunt, they can't get your records that way, which is definitely a good thing, and something that a lot of people have been concerned about. So the other key risk is cybersecurity. And when we talk about cybersecurity, what we're talking about is the risk that potentially someone could hack the whole system and gain access to all of the data on the system. So this isn't so much about what if a doctor, illegally looks at my information. We're talking about hackers who might then sell your information on the black market. And this has been a concern with kind of other health with other health information databases being hacked overseas. So there has been some similar things in the UK and the US recently with databases being hacked. And you might ask, why would a hacker want to know my blood type? It could lead to insurance fraud, identity theft, and that kind of stuff. So definitely not something that we would want to happen. So the main thing to note on this topic is that there's really not much you can do here to prevent the risk. The kinds of personal information that will be on your health record is things like your name, your date of birth, your Medicare card number. Now, the unfortunate thing is that most of these things you can't change. Your date of birth, you definitely can't change. When we talk about cybersecurity in other situations, so for example, banks is another big cybersecurity thing we talk about. That information often can be changed. You can change your, credit card. You can get rid of a credit card, get a new one. You can change your PIN. You can do that kind of stuff. In some cases, you can change your address. But this information on your My Health record, you're very limited with how you can change it. So once you get hacked, there's not much you can do to minimize risk. And there is nothing you can do to prevent it other than kind of hope and trust that the government has got a really strong system. The one thing I suppose that is a positive is that the system has been up and running since 2012, as I mentioned. And so apparently there have been no cybersecurity breaches so far. So the system's doing well to date, but that is subject to the proviso that when we get to January next year, there's going to be a whole lot more people on the system, which might increase the risk.
So I've got a question about privacy, so I might ask that at this stage, and then we've got some other questions that I might come to later on. But you mentioned, Emily, that health practitioners who aren't directly involved in care should not be accessing the records. How is this controlled or managed? And the example is if a young person is concerned that their parent works as a nurse in a hospital or that kind of thing, they don't want them to be able to access their records.
Yeah, and that is an interesting hypothetical that could very well happen. The way it's managed is that it's illegal to access it. Now that means they could be at risk of penalties, legal penalties, fines, things like that, if they do access it in conditions where they're not meant to. So it's one of those situations where there's no kind of structural barriers. They could very well access it, but it would just be fear of the law that would hopefully stop them. But
do they have their own login?
So as I understand it, what happens is that there is a login for the hospital. So that's not a great start because, yes, anyone in the hospital could log in. But what we will talk about and what Chris will talk about is that there are some things individuals can do to control parts of their record and to control who accesses their record independently of kind of the hospital setup. And so if people are concerned, especially if they've got family in healthcare and there's some sensitive information, there are definitely some steps you can take. And Chris will talk about that in a second.
Correct, thanks. Okay, keep going about
Fantastic. Well, we actually will now hand over to Chris. Now that I've one more thing that I almost forgot about. On the slides there, you'll see you do have to be notified if your personal information is hacked. So there is a scheme set up where you will have to be, if someone hacks your information and it's deemed that hack has resulted in some kind of risk of serious harm to you, you do have to be notified. Like I said, how effective that is in this circumstance is questionable, given that there's not much you can do once you've found out that you've been hacked. You can't really change the information that's on your record, but you will at least have the power of knowledge. So having said that, like I mentioned, there haven't been any hacks to date, which is good news. And now that all that darkness has been covered, we're going to bring some light in. Chris is going to talk about what you can actually do to manage all of these risks.
Yes, thank you, Emily. It's always good to be the light rather than the darkness circumstance. So there are several risks, as Emily has outlined, in relation to privacy and cybersecurity, but there are also steps that individuals can take to help manage and mitigate that risk. There are three categories of steps that we've outlined there on the slide. Individuals can monitor the circumstances in which their My Health record is being accessed, and they can restrict who can access their record, and they can and what content can be accessed, and they can also control what content is uploaded to their record in the first place, which would obviously result in controlling what content can be accessed by others as well. So we're going to start off by talking about monitoring access itself. So the My Health record portal, if anyone's had a look at, there is an access history log that is there on the portal. You can view your access activity. You can see when the record has been accessed by a new health practitioner. So whenever time a new practitioner accesses the record, you'll see a record there in your access history log of that access occurring. You can also sign up for automatic notifications via email or via SMS, so that when you go to a new GP, or you can get notification that, yes, my new GP has accessed my record, or indeed in circumstances in which you weren't aware that someone would have access, you'll be going to receive a text or an email. If you choose to do so, you can set up those automatic notifications. So, which might surprise you in certain circumstances. If someone who shouldn't have access, or you think shouldn't have access, you'll be notified. So you have a full record of what circumstances and who and when your record is being accessed. The second step individuals can take is actually restricting access to the record itself. So the broader step is something called a record access code, RAC. So individuals can set up a code to restrict access to the whole medical record. It will be 4 to 8 character code. So you have to, individual medical practitioners and healthcare providers won't be able to access your record unless you provide them with this code. That's something that's not on by default. Individuals have to set up that feature in My Health record on the website. That's the most secure method, if you like. You'll have to set up this PIN code, if you like, and then on an individual basis, healthcare providers, you can select, if you like, be selective about which healthcare providers you provide that code to.
So, Chris, in that example about a parent working in a hospital and the young person being concerned, this is something they can do. Yes,
that's right. Yes, and yeah, exactly. The code will be restrictive. It's the wall goes up around the record. There are certain circumstances later on in an emergency in which that wall can be breached, but we'll touch on that later. But broadly speaking, if that particular circumstance, if someone's worried about, ignoring the legal penalties aside, the practical possibility that someone could do that, if you had set up a code, this PIN code, then only people you had selectively chosen and given that code to would be able to access anything on your medical record, on your My Health record. The second step is that limited document access code on the slide there. So that's particular documents or types of documents. So if you don't want to set up a code for the whole system to restrict that access, but particular individual documents or individual types of documents you can restrict access to with a separate limited document access code. Again, like a PIN code, 4 to 8 characters, and you can be restrictive in that way. The secondary purpose point that Emily raised earlier is an interesting way as well. It's another protection that individuals can opt out of their data being used for that secondary purpose for health and medical research. So that's something to think about going forward. As I said, it's opt out. So by default, from 2020 onwards, your information will be used for health and medical research unless you take steps to opt out, which you can do on the portal. And the nominated representative point that Emily raised earlier as well, you can also provide that operates by a different personal access code. So you'll provide a code to them so that, that's how it practically works on a level. You say, I nominate my partner to be my nominated representative, and you provide them with a code. They then log on and provide that code to the My Health record, and that's how they get access practically. And that's how that, in circumstances in which you could withdraw that consent, withdraw that power, and change that code, and so on. So moving on to some actual exceptions to the access controls. So I mentioned before about setting up that access code, that wall around your record that prevents access to anyone. Of course, in the case of an emergency, there is a carve out there. So if there is a serious threat to your life, health and safety, emergency access to your record could be provided, even if you have set that access code up. For example, there might be a situation in which you are unconscious in a hospital and they're not able to retrieve, they can't ask you for your code. Then hospital staff may be granted access, but there is that test there that has to be a serious threat to your life, health, or safety. They'll need the healthcare provider in that situation would need your Medicare number, your surname, date of birth, and gender in order to obtain that access. In the case where there is that access code protection set up. That emergency access would only be for a period of 5 days, and it would show in your history in that log that you're able to access a My Health record. So you'd be tracked there as well. And if you have set up automatic notifications of that access, you would also be notified of that via email or SMS if you have set that up as well.
And so, Chris, you just mentioned people have to give their name and gender, but what happens for people who've changed their names or gender?
So it'll have to match what's on the Medicare system, is my understanding. So if that's been updated, if your name has changed in the Medicare system, then that's the same way that when you go to a hospital, you would give your Medicare card and say an identification document. In the same way that if you in emergency now these days, they would still want to track who's unconscious in the hospital bed in front of me. They would be able to look that up if you've got identification documents, if it was a true serious threat to your life, health, and safety.
And one thing that we have had questions about on that issue of what happens if I'm in the process of kind of changing my identity documents, or my identity documents don't match my affirmed gender now. That is a problem currently with opting out. So you can opt out online, which we'll talk about briefly. We'll talk about that later in more depth, but briefly now, it is an issue with people trying to opt out online. I would say if you have concerns, if you're having troubles, call, use the helpline and call and talk to someone, and they might be able to do something for you over the phone. But there are definitely some issues currently with people either getting a record or opting out of the records when you are in that state of flux between your identity documents not matching your affirmed gender at the moment.
Yes, okay, so there's a few other ways that you can see on the slide in which access controls have exceptions. So for system maintenance of the system, that management of the My Health record system, if directly authorised by a Commonwealth or state law or directed by a court, with the consent of the individual, so separate to anyone you provided your code to, if you directly provide consent to a healthcare provider. And then also professional indemnity insurance for practitioners if there's an investigation down the track about practitioners' care levels. And for law enforcement, something Emily mentioned earlier about the change, and that has changed so that it's only if it's a court order, and that the previous wording of the legislation is quite broad in that it enabled law enforcement to request access from the system operator of the My Health record if they wanted to prevent, detect, investigate, or prosecute any criminal offence. That was obviously quite broad, and it's been limited to basically limited to something called unlawful activity, which has been limited to only investigation of insurance fraud issues. So circumstances in which there's a suspicion that incorrect information may have been provided, or false information provided to a health insurance provider, and that the system operator is then authorised to provide that information if it's reasonably necessary, information of your My Health record, if it is reasonably necessary for that investigation of potential insurance fraud. And that's the only circumstance in which the information can be provided to law enforcement.
And I just wanted to say too that this is a really good change. It's only come through this week on Monday. It's really positive because we had heard before that there were concerns from parts of the community who were vulnerable, including sex workers or people who are HIV positive, who were really nervous about police having powers to get access to their medical records based on nothing more than kind of a prejudice or, you know, kind of coming up almost with reasons to find you suspicious of some crime in order to get those documents and that information. And the good news now is that they just can't do that. There's no grounds for them to do that. It has to be really niche. You have to be defrauding an insurance company, really, for them to be able to get your records, which is a big positive.
Okay, so moving on to another way in which individuals can help manage some of those risks relating to the My Health Record system. The third way is about controlling what content is actually on the My Health Record. So Emily mentioned before that you can actually remove, when you set up your record, you can actually select which information you enter yourself at the beginning. And as the record exists and information is entered automatically from various healthcare providers, you can, on an individual basis, remove certain records so that they won't be able to be accessed by healthcare providers moving forward. You can remove Medicare information that is provided automatically on an automatic basis. So when you set up your My Health Record, that the past 2 year period of Medicare information that is uploaded to the system, you can individually remove that. You can hide that from other healthcare providers. And then if you later on want to restore access to those documents, you can then restore it. So you'll always be able to see information which you may have hidden or in an archived sort of way, but you can then always restore it to be able to be viewed at a later stage by a healthcare provider. So the third way is that you can obviously ask your doctor or healthcare provider to not upload certain information. So if there's certain documents that you know, or certain consultations or appointments that you particularly concerned about, you can request at that time that information relating to that appointment not be uploaded to the My Health record, and they have a duty to not upload that information, so you don't have to bother with removing it after the fact and that kind of thing.
Thanks, Chris. We're going to do a quick poll now, but before, there's a question that has a few parts to it, but it might be a good summary of the last part we've been talking about. So if someone has a usual GP, but they see another doctor, say for a hormone prescription, do they need to inform both doctors that they don't want a record created? So that's one part to it.
So just to clarify, I suppose when you talk about not wanting a record created, I suppose, are you talking about opting out altogether or having a specific record of that session?
I think that's the second part of the question. So if they have opted out, then can a record still be created, or can information still be put on by a doctor? So that's
okay, so to start with the first part, when you opt out, you can opt out directly through the My Health Record government website. So you don't need to go to your GP in order to opt out. So that's the first part. The second part is no. If you've opted out, you don't have a record, so nothing can be uploaded. So that's not even an issue. If you do opt out and then later down the track you decide you do want a record, you can, of course, opt in later down the track. And that situation that you're talking about might really come down to some of the access controls Chris was talking about. So it might be the case that you say, okay, I want a My Health Record and I want all my general health information on it. But you might say to the doctor who is doing your hormone prescriptions, you might say, can you please not upload absolutely anything at all to my records? Then there's no trace of it. Alternatively, you might get them to upload that information, but then you might put a code around all of the documents relating to your hormone treatments so that no one can access that information unless they have that code. And then you might only give that code to the doctor giving you those hormone treatments. So those are some of the different ways you can manage that.
That sounds really good, but that relates to another question someone asked, that all that requires quite a lot of health literacy and IT literacy, like to know which information needs which codes, how to do the codes. So how do you manage that?
It definitely does. And that's one of the difficulties, is that there is a lot of intricacies in managing these things. The first thing that I would say is that go to your doctor, the doctor who is giving you those hormone treatments, and say, can you help me? Can you help me set up this code? Can you tell me what documents should have this code? And they, by all means, should be able to help you. They'll have access to the system, and they should be able to, if nothing else, at least walk you through the steps. And, you know, I suppose the second part is that if you really are scared and you really don't have the time or the knowledge or the insight to be able to do it, then just don't upload those documents, might be the simple answer. The third answer might be that you come and see someone like the ICLC, or you ring up the My Health Records system, the hotline, and you say, look, just help me out. And they really should be able to walk you through it. But there are options, I think, for people who need some help.
Thank you. I think that does clear up a few things. Thanks. Okay, I'll just launch the poll. Is that all right? So this is just a summary of what we've been talking about. So the question is, if I decide to have a My Health record, what applies? I can't control what is on my record. I can control who sees my record. I can control what is on my record. I can control both what is on my record and who can see it. And I think I'll close that now. And Emily and Chris, you'll be very pleased to see that 100% of people say that they can control both what is on their record and who can see it.
That's fantastic.
Great.
Okay, so moving on to the situation we were referring to earlier about cancelling or opting out. So as Emily mentioned earlier, this system is actually, a form of this system has actually been in place since 2012. So the slide you're about to see actually needs some slight updating, because it says, I think 6.1 million people, Australians, already have a record. I think it's 6.3 at the latest check. But as people are obviously finding out about it in the media, they're investigating it, and more people have, if you like, opted in, because it has been an opt-in system up until, and it will be up until 31 January. That is, unless you've been part of a trial in 2016, those two particular regions. It was previously known as the Personally Controlled Electronic Health Record, PCEHR, and then the e-health record, and now the, if I might say, the much simpler and better title of the My Health Record. The personally controlled aspect is interesting there from that name. You can kind of see how the government at least was trying to emphasise that individuals do have that level of control over who can access and what content is uploaded to their health record. And now it's just simply known as a My Health Record. So in a situation that, say, you've already opted in, or you haven't opted out by 31 January, you can actually cancel your My Health Record. If in that situation that you cancel that, your data will no longer be able to be accessed by healthcare providers, that data that was on the My Health Record. Even in an emergency, you'll, of course, also lose the ability to access that record. And what has changed since this, in the legislation that came into effect on Monday this week, is that what was previously the case was that the data, if you cancelled your record, was not permanently deleted until 30 years after your death. What has changed is that once you cancel your record, legislation now states that all data relating to that record will now be permanently deleted. So that's very good news in terms of people who are worried about privacy protections. If they were cancelling the record and the data was hanging around on the portal, then obviously it's still vulnerable to any sort of cybersecurity risks that we're talking about, and certain privacy risks. Even if it was hidden from healthcare providers, after you cancel it, there was still a risk of that latent information hanging around. Now, once you request to cancel your My Health Record, then that information will be permanently deleted. And so that last point there about the data being accessible for maintenance, order, or other purposes, that would no longer be the case if it is permanently deleted once you request that cancellation of your My Health Record. And so in terms of the opting out process itself, 31 January, obviously next year, is the deadline. You'll need your name, date of birth, address, and Medicare card number to verify your identity. So opting out, if you choose to opt out, it doesn't impact anything else relating to Medicare, any other entitlement to services or anything else. It's just the creation of the My Health Record itself. If you have dependents, if you're a parent and you have responsibility for children under the age of 18, you can opt out, or if you're a legal guardian, you can opt out on their behalf with their details. And children aged over the age of 14 can also opt out on individually themselves. They'll need their Medicare card number details to do that. And also, dependents over the age of 18, people can opt out on their behalf once they provide evidence of their authority, and that may include evidence that their dependent is not capable of making decisions for themselves. It could be a letter from a medical practitioner, psychologist, or a court, or any other evidence of legal authority, such as guardianship orders, or possibly a statutory declaration as well, that can assist you with doing that, where the dependent is over the age of 18. So in that situation which you have opted out, or you have cancelled your My Health record, and your record is therefore permanently deleted, if you decide that you would like to opt back into the My Health record, you can register for a My Health record. It will be a similar situation in which you're right now, where you're creating a My Health record. You'll be able to, it'll sort of be a blank slate. There'll be a selection of whether you want your Medicare details uploaded, any personal health summary you want to upload as well. However, obviously, if your record has previously been permanently deleted, there won't be all that medical history of previous GP visits and that kind of thing on the My Health record. It'll be a clean slate, and then going forward, entries will be automatically entered as per normal, as we've described today. So on that slide there, the re-registering about a cancelled My Health record, as with the legislation change this week, there won't be any sort of re-registering. It'll be a clean new My Health record that'll be created because of the situation that a cancelled My Health record is now permanently deleted.
And that can be a real positive for people who have a My Health record prior to transition. If you decide you want a fresh start once you've kind of fully transitioned and you want to begin again, you now have that power to completely cancel your record, get rid of everything, start over fresh. So that is a positive change now that data is permanently gone once you delete it.
So we've got another poll just to test knowledge again, and we've got quite a lot of questions. So I might do the poll, do some key takeaway messages, and then we'll hit the questions. Okay. So finally, and I'm sure everyone's going to nail these again. So select all the statements that are true about My Health record. If I want to opt out, I must do so by the 31st of January 2019. 14 to 18-year-olds can choose to opt out by themselves. I can cancel my record anytime after the 31st of January. If I've opted out, I can change my mind and register later, and my family can access my records. I'll just close that now and share the results with you. So this is interesting. So 100% of people, yes, we can opt out. They must do so by the 31st of January. About 2/3 of people say 14 to 18-year-olds can choose to opt out by themselves. Is that true?
That is true. That is true.
Great. Just over 80% of people say I can cancel my record anytime after the 31st of January.
You can cancel your record anytime.
Anytime. Yep. And if I've opted out, I can change my mind and register later. 100% of people agree with that.
Correct.
And then nobody has said my family can access my records, but I guess that's a bit of a trick question.
It's probably a bit of a trick question. And if you said no to that question, you're probably right, because your family can't access your record unless you give them permission or unless there's a legal guardianship situation. So I'd say that that's a good answer, that everyone said no.
Great. Thanks, everyone. That was fantastic. Do you want to go to your takeaway messages and then we'll go to the questions?
Yes, okay. So we'll just to sum up some of the key points. That date again, the 31st of January, you must opt out by the 31st of January. Once you have a record, you can, that point has actually been changed. As we've mentioned, you can cancel your record once you have one, and it will be permanently deleted. So you can ignore the 30 years point there. There are ways you can manage some of the risks, the privacy risks. There are access codes we've talked about, the different levels of access codes. You can specifically ask your healthcare provider, your doctor, not to upload particular information or particular types of documents, and you can be notified or set up notifications when new doctors access your record by email or SMS. And there are circumstances in which access controls can be circumvented in the emergency, as we mentioned earlier, as an example. And there are limited ways in which you can manage the cybersecurity risks. If it's vulnerable for hacking, the only thing I would say is that you can manage what content you put up on your record. And so in the circumstances in which there is a vulnerability and some sort of hack occurring, you can limit what information would be available and out there, if you like, as a way to manage that. But individuals may be concerned to the point where they consider opting out if they're particularly concerned about the cybersecurity risk. And now, any questions?
Just on your screen now, you can see the Inner City Legal Centre website where people can go for further help around this issue.
Yeah, and that fact sheet that you can see there on the right is actually a great resource. On the back, it has step-by-step instructions on how you can implement some of those access codes and things that we've talked about today. So for people who are curious and don't know how to do it, I would recommend jumping on that, having a look. It all comes from the My Health Record website, so you can also access that information there, but that's a nice, concise summary of it.
And that fact sheet on the right is a handout attached to the webinar, and it's also in the email that you'll get afterwards. But if you're listening to a recorded version of the webinar, you could get the fact sheet from the Inner City website.
That's right.
Yep. Great. Okay. And so the image you can see on the left actually is a easy English version of My Health Records, I think, or there is an easy English version, which also leads to one of the questions that somebody's asked around, I guess, everything to do with My Health Records sounds really difficult for people with intellectual disabilities or other vulnerable people in the community. Is that something that's being dealt with, I guess, or how can you help with that?
That's definitely a problem. And so I'd make a few comments. Firstly is that obviously people who do have kind of serious intellectual disabilities, if they are in a case where they have a legal guardian, then obviously that's how that gets managed, is that your legal guardian is responsible for doing these things. And so, you know, that would be the kind of, I suppose, way that that's managed. But there are some real issues with people who, you know, for example, homeless people or people without access to the internet, or people who just don't understand this, people from non-English background communities. There are a lot of issues with that. There's no clear answer as to how that's managed. I don't think the My Health Record system has really kind of considered how to manage that. What I would say is that really rely on the community resources you have. So your local community legal centres, organisations like Legal Aid, or, you know, go to My Health Record themselves, call up their hotline. You know, that is a free 1-800 number you can get information from.
And at Inner City Legal Centre, we already are stepping some people through. We're sitting with them and walking them through opting out if that's what they want to do, or setting it up as they need to.
Great. So also we've had some questions around the impact on doctors and health practitioners, like how are they being trained on this system? Because it seems like they're being asked to maybe walk people through opting out as well, or the record. So, yeah, I guess it's more work for health professionals to talk through My Health Record about the codes, all that type of thing. It's really difficult for them. So someone's asking about the training and the extra burden.
Yeah, so I mean, it may well be a bit of an extra burden on them. You can actually see some of the materials that are available to health practitioners. If you go on the My Health Record website, there's an option when you first get on that website that says, who are you? Are you a person interested for yourself? Are you a medical practitioner? Whatever. If you click on the button that says, I'm a medical practitioner, you'll be able to see some of the resources that the government has made available. And they are recommending for practitioners to have extensive kind of privacy training for the staff in their GP clinics and for their in their hospitals around how they can use the record, what they can't use the record for, you know, and as well the basic IT training of how you access it and things like this. So GPs are being given training on how it works and how to control it, and so for that reason GPs should be able, they should be equipped to help patients coming in with questions about it. And the one thing I would note, however, is that if you are, you know, really concerned about the burden on medical practitioners of this, is that there already are burdens on medical practitioners in terms of privacy. You know, medical practitioners, have always had access to your personal information, your private information, and they've always had legal obligations to manage that carefully and in accordance with the law. So from that perspective, really not a lot has changed. They still have those same privacy obligations. It's just getting used to a new IT system for them, which, you know, hopefully in this day and age, they're more than able to do. Although you never know.
Okay, another question. This is just around clarifying how My Health Records works for young people. Was there a recent amendment to My Health Records which said that once a person turns 14, they are no longer a dependent on My Health Records?
Yeah, so there was some stuff. So the laws that passed this Monday, I think, clarified the rules around children of age 14, and that is true. Once you are 14, you can make your own decisions about your My Health record. So you can choose to opt out even if your parents don't want you to. You can control your record. You can set up an access code and say, hey, guess what, parents, you can't see my record anymore. Once you're 14, you can do all of that. Once you're 14, having said that, you don't have to do that. So between that window of 14 to 18, your parents can still make those decisions if you're a 14-year-old who doesn't care and just doesn't want to be involved. But yes, that's correct. That now once you're 14, you can have that control.
So a question here related to diverse genders. How will that be recorded in My Health Record? So will they allow for accurate representation, or will they only offer binary options?
Look, that's something that I'm not 100% sure of. I haven't personally kind of logged in and had a look at the system, so I can't tell you. What I can tell you is that it's based off your identity record. So I would expect that whatever shows on your Medicare card is probably what's going to show on the system. And I would really highly recommend, if anyone has concerns about that, to ring up the hotline and just ask them. And that's something that they should be able to tell you fairly easily.
Okay. Someone's already logged on to the Inner City Legal Centre website and said that fact sheet might not be there, but I'm sure that can be arranged.
We will make sure it's there.
Before you go to the office.
Sorry, just to clarify that issue around the young people, someone has said that they thought the legislation passed meant that once a young person turns 14, the parents will automatically be removed as authorised representatives, rather than the young person can opt to take control of their records.
I think that is the case. I think that's correct. I think what I was more getting at is that you, as a 14-year-old, could choose to give, you can still choose to give your parents control. But I think that is correct, that now the situation is at 14, parent access is no longer an automatic thing at that age. Yeah.
So it's a 14-year-old would need to choose to opt out themselves.
Yes. So the situation would be that if you were 14, you can now, yes, that's correct. Your parents don't have automatic say on your account, but you know you would have to give them authorization to control that account. So your parents can opt out for you if you say they can. And I imagine, for example, if that was the case, you might have to get on the phone and actually say to the person on the other end of the phone, hey, I agree to let my parents opt out on my behalf, or something like that. So it is, the laws have given stronger controls to 14-year-olds.
So I'm just having a look at the questions. There are another couple of questions. We've got sort of 5 minutes to go. So if anyone else has questions, please do type those in. So are there examples of when, if parent, I guess this is still a big issue for young people who may not want parents to access their records. Are there examples of parents still being able to see records now? Like, how does a young person deal with that, I guess, if they already have a My Health record?
I'm not quite sure how that works in practice at the moment. I think now that the law has changed, it should be automatic. So the way that the laws work is that when they were passed on Monday, they applied to all My Health records, including already existing ones. So I imagine that when that passed on Monday, that a system kind of refresh or some kind of, IT magic was rolled out to mean that parents can't access the account anymore. I would assume that would have happened automatically. Like I said, though, I think if anyone has a particular concern about that, I think just ring up the hotline and say, hey, what's the situation? Do I need to do anything to, now that I'm 14, do I need to do anything? But I think that should be automatic.
Okay. This is a side issue, I guess, but is My Health Records expected to assist with people who might go prescription drug shopping around to different doctors to get prescriptions? Is that one of the ideas of it?
I don't think that's certainly not one of the ideas in the sense that that's probably not the reason the government decided to do this, but I think that's definitely one of the side benefits, is that there will be kind of a record that your pharmacist and your doctor can access about exactly what medications you are taking. So we would expect to see that it would identify, quite quickly if people were prescription shopping and things like that. But I wouldn't, that's probably not, the main goal of the system, but it is something that will come out of it, I think.
Okay. And a legal question here, is there an appeals process around accessing records under, I guess that's one of the exceptions for serious medical risks or emergency, if somebody wants to dispute that, if there's been access, and what are the mechanisms around that? Is there a tribunal, or I guess somebody said VCAT or NCAT, but they'd be state bodies. So is there a process?
Yeah, so it wouldn't be NCAT or VCAT. This would be a complaints process that would probably have to go through the Privacy Commissioner, I would imagine.
And there's also the Administrative Appeals Tribunal that deals with federal decisions or decisions made subject to federal regulation and legislation. Although I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I would expect the My Health Record website to outline a complaints or feedback process, as most government sort of service providers are required to do, although I'm not sure on the specific information of how it works if you don't believe access should have been granted, or you don't believe you believe it's been inappropriately accessed by someone.
And I suppose the thing to keep in mind as well is that if you are making a complaint after the fact, so after access has already occurred, at most what you would get out of that is, maybe a penalty would be imposed on the other party. There might be some kind of, small amount of compensation, maybe an apology. But after the fact, you won't be able to really stop. You can't take back the access once it's occurred. So that probably, even if there is an appeals process, which, as Chris mentioned, I'm sure there is, it probably won't get you a fantastic outcome, unfortunately. But you would hope that really they wouldn't be accessing it unless it was an emergency.
The penalties are there to help protect against that, and they'll be enforced, I'm sure. And that's one of the things we were talking about earlier about the doctors having to train for this, and they already have privacy obligations or respect to privacy, but there are special penalties for applying to misuse of the My Health Record system that is on individuals and institutions that misuse it. So I guess I'm not sure of the details of how that's enforced, but I'm sure that those penalties will, hopefully we can hope those penalties will be effective as a disincentive, but also when misuse has occurred, if it occurs, that they'll be enforced and carried out on individuals to do that.
And the good news is the penalties were just increased on Monday. So it's getting scarier and scarier for people who are thinking about abusing the system.
Great. So very good timing, I think, for this webinar with all these changes that have happened, and apologies for the slides being slightly out of sync with that. It's just all very new. Okay, well, unless there are any other questions, I think we will say goodbye and thank you so much to Emily, Chris and Vicky. And as I said, this is going to be, there's going to be a recording of this podcast, of this webinar, and we are also recording a podcast on our Law for Community Workers on the Go channel. So do keep an eye out for those, and please feel free to circulate those to your contacts and friends and colleagues. And thank you. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.